So finally, I just wanted to run through and kind of bring together some of the things we've been talking about. What are Brazil's opportunities and what it needs to do to capitalize on them? I feel like I've woven back and forward between some of these themes, partly because you can't really separate them. They're all interactive on each other. So let's just remind ourselves of what Brazil's demographics are. For the next 10 years, we've got the working age population growing more rapidly than the overall population. So that means fantastically low dependency rates. But what it also means is that the dependency rates start to rise again from 2022. So that's only 10 years away. And when you look at the projections further out, by 2030, less than half of the population will be under 18. Currently, nearly 2/3, 63% is under 18. But here's the thing to think about. By 2030, 29% of Brazilians will be over 64, compared to just 13% today. So that's quite a dramatic change in 20 years. And already, even though there are only few old people currently, social security costs are already on a par with many developing nations. So there's this urgency for thinking about how to improve elementary education right away. There are some suggestions about how, and all of this requires investment. It requires political will, it requires investment. But if it isn't addressed, then 30 years from now, the next generation is going to be suffering from the lack of activity in this generation. Suggestions include simple things such as reducing class sizes, but even simpler and less costly is a better selection systems. The teaching profession is actually oversupplied in Brazil, but what is undersupplied is the quality of selection and training. I think I've already touched on the dramatic implications for demographics of social security and healthcare. If we're already struggling with a social security bill in Brazil, what's it going to be like 20 years from now as the population ages and as Brazil is already more resembling a developed economy in terms of the lifestyle type diseases that are actually hugely costly to treat, and more of that is on the way. And just to touch briefly on this idea of what the implications are for cities over the next 20 years of the age of the population as it is now. Well, at the moment, there is a significant proportion of the population, a relatively large number of people are at sort of house buying age. And what this is implying is a sharp rise in housing demand over the next 2 decades. This is something that could be harnessed for a much needed reshaping of urban environments. If it's not harnessed, then this will be impossible to achieve 20 years down the line by a much older population. It either happens now or it won't happen. But what this is implying is building 1.5 million units a year for 15 years. That raises a whole load of financing issues. We know that mortgage lending as a share of GDP is very low at the moment in Brazil, less than 10% of GDP last time I looked. It has a lot of room to grow, but where is that? It's not clear where that's going to come from. Financial markets have improved a lot in Brazil. It's not clear they're deep enough by themselves to face this. But more importantly, perhaps, is a massive challenge for local governments to keep up with the basic infrastructure that this housing demand will imply. And the rough calculation we've made is that this would imply an expenditure on infrastructure cost of 0.8% of GDP a year for municipal governments. And we need to compare that to the primary surplus they're currently developing of a mere 0.1% of GDP at this time when the public finances are great. In short, what we're saying is the next 5 years really have to be action-packed. So I'm actually running out of time, so I'm just going to run through these. This looks like a completely obvious point, work towards decreasing the unemployment rate for younger workers, but it's not so obvious in the sense that what it means is that the younger workers who have more education, they're in a much better position to absorb on-the-job training and raise productivity. That's why it's important to increase employment among younger workers now, because that's about productivity in the economy as a whole. Then there are some suggestions about how you might support this massive demand for housing and promote greater investment in the housing sector. Currently, bureaucracy and a proliferation of procedures is also something that's hampering housing starts. And also to finally address these long-standing issues in the social security system, which is, what is the retirement age in Brazil at the moment? People know the statutory retirement age? Does any? You're kidding. Is it 54?
65 is the old age retirement age.
Okay.
Quite a few people retire at the age of 50.
And what's life expectancy just isn't that much different to the developed world, so that underscores the huge fiscal burden that implies. So, just to reinforce this, over the next 5 years, the population of the over 65s grows by 19%. The workforce grows by 6.6%. So that's already underscoring the huge burden it's putting on the next generation. In other words, there needs to be a story that's sold to the population as a whole and to the legislature that is about placing the social security finances on a sustainable path, not to balance the public finances, but to lay the basis for Brazil's future and for the future of the next generation, and avoid the fate of what's happening in Western Europe at the moment. I'm sure a lot of Brazilians think that, they're much richer in Western Europe. I wouldn't mind having that problem, but there's going to be a lot of unemployment, a lot of cutbacks to social security in the developed world over the next decade, and it's going to be very painful and indeed. So just to conclude, I've ranged across a lot of different issues, but I think all of them are fundamentally interlinked. And although a lot of them take a long time to come to fruition, the fact is that most of them require immediate action. That's upgrading the quality of elementary and secondary education, upgrading the quality of infrastructure, revamping social security, thinking about the longer-term health provision, deepening credit options. So just to conclude, the idea really that Brazil could converge to the productivity levels of rich economies within 15 to 20 years is just not reasonable unless there is an extensive and prompt upgrade to some of these areas within the next 5 years. And with that, I'd like to hand over to thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to discussing this further with our panel. Thank you.